Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm so happy you've decided to take this time to join us for this important conversation about fighting the trans ideology. If you're new to the channel and you're interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis, I do hope you'll subscribe to be notified when I make new content or host live shows like this. Please also like and share this broadcast so others can benefit from the information we are about to share and participate in the conversation. We will try to take questions and comments as we go, as they're relevant. Each of these shows is an opportunity to hear from people who are working to protect children and improve education in America any way they can, and this one is no exception. As the host of the Transform to Freedom podcast, Sara makes content that deals with politics and culture, usually reacting to the news of the day, especially when that news deals with trans issues. She has interviewed politicians such as former VP candidate Spike Cohen and New York gubernatorial candidate Larry Sharpe. She's also made videos with public figures such as Ariel Scarcella, Lauren Chen, Hannah Cox, human trafficking survivor advocate Eliza Blue, trans icon Buck Angel, and many more. Her aim is to provide insight that is severely lacking in our modern discourse. And I've invited her here today for two reasons. One, because her insight is unique. Being a trans person, I think she can really not only shed some light on what is going on with this fight that parents are up against, but also help us understand the sort of delineations between, how we can work with people who are trans to protect our children. I'm concerned that in our zeal to do that, in our zeal to protect our children, we are alienating and losing the help and the insight of people who want to help us as much as we want to protect our kids. They want to protect kids too. They either have kids, they were kids, they love kids, or they just love truth, reality, and freedom. And that would characterize my guest, Sara. So please join me in welcoming Sara Higdon. Hi, how are you?
Hey, I am good. Thanks for having me, Dad. This is great.
I'm really glad that you're here. I for those who weren't there, we had a Twitter space. I think it was a weekend before last. And I think it was great. It was recorded. You might be able to find it out there. But I set it up and invited Sara to join me because I was seeing you get ganged up on. And I didn't like it because I wanted to hear what you had to say. I wanted to hear the substance of what you had to say. I really value the work that you're doing on the ground. You're doing things that a lot of people, parents included, are not brave enough to do. You're going head to head with trans rights activists, TRAs as they're often called. And that has brought you some heat too, right? Why don't you tell us a little bit about specifically what you've been doing and how you've been fighting this?
Yeah, so I mean, I started my YouTube channel back in 2020, actually, and just recently it's really started kind of kicking off about a year ago. But I started because even back in like 2018, 2019 timeframe, as I was even just still exploring my gender, because I didn't even start taking hormones until 2019, March of 2019, I decided to go full-time and transition. But I was on all these Reddit boards and stuff like that, and I realized that there was the coming storm. I saw it then that if you the narrative was to attack anybody who went against the ideology. There was a huge communist sect that I saw that was going on there. If you spoke anything that was like about individual liberty or freedom that wasn't like these Antifa like tropes, you were attacked as well. And then one of the big things is I was always concerned because they were telling children, telling just basically anybody, if you're gender nonconforming, you're probably trans and all this stuff. And it was all this, as we call it in the community, it's called like hug boxing, where no matter, they don't even listen to what you have to say, they're going to affirm whatever you want them to affirm. And so it's the cycle to where you can just tell them something and they will, oh yeah, that's probably true, yeah, that's right, you're doing great, or you look great, or all this stuff. And there was one point where somebody asked about what we referred to, at least then, as trans trenders, people that were grabbing onto this trend, grabbing onto being trans because it was becoming trendy. And I stated that trans trenders exist, and when the detransition rate skyrockets, it's going to hurt actual trans people because there is going to be a wave of backlash. I got banned from that Reddit group for saying that. And so at that point, I knew that this is going to be an issue. And obviously, we saw it start to become an issue, 2020, 2020, since 2020. And that's why I started my YouTube channel in 2020, is because I knew if I didn't speak out and get ahead of this, then these people were going to be creating a perception of people like me that is not really that accurate. I don't think that vast majority of trans people are what you see on TV and all these activists are. In fact, I think I generally look at any extreme as, the 8% get all the attention, and they create perceptions for the entire group. And that goes with any large group. I think the vast majority of trans people probably transition, go stealth, and just go live their lives quietly, and nobody really knows who they are. And you would never even know that they were trans unless they told you, which I think is one reason why it's so hard to get so many of us to speak out against it as well, because you get attacked. You get attacked from both sides. And for them, why would they? They are living their lives comfortably, and they don't need to. And so that I think that's why it's important for the few of us that are out here speaking, to be out here speaking. And like what I've been doing lately. So if you saw, we have a partner group with Gays Against Groomers, called Trans Against Groomers, that I'm a founding member. And we are building a coalition ourselves of all trans people to speak out against this ideology. That's one step that we're doing. And then I've kind of been partnering with a lot of different organizations, like No Left Turn Education. I've spoken with them twice. And then this last week, last Thursday, I was up in Rhode Island, where I spoke with Nicole Solas and in front of a group of people from the Independent Women's Network. So that the Independent Women's Network was the host, and we live streamed it. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is I'm traveling around and just trying to speak to a lot of these groups, because I believe that parents have the big majorities. Like, you guys have the numbers to be able to create effective change. Whereas my role in this is to get out here and become more of a shield from the, being called transphobic or anything like that, because I don't believe any of you are transphobic. I think you're just wanting to protect children the same way as, our organizations are. And so when I'm out here speaking, I can kind of, we can provide that cover to say, that's not transphobic. And if these trans people, we agree with what they're saying, and that kind of helps move the narrative along, so you guys aren't just being cast into this other perception about who you are without people really even noticing. Because if they see a trans person by your side, they might think twice if you're actually being hateful towards trans people.
That's well, I appreciate that. Thank you, as a mom. But you mentioned a little bit ago, you said something, and I don't know if anyone picked up on it, but I did, and I it's a question I have. We got sort of into a debate. Now, you and I didn't, but with the other people in the audience in the Twitter space, and unfortunately we were ending it, so we didn't get to dive into this as much as I would have liked. You said actual trans person. And so I would love to get your perspective on what that means, because I think one of the biggest sources of confusion for people who are not trans, okay, is that because the trans ideology and the ideologues make a claim about what trans is, okay, and for most parents, for most people who have gone their whole lives not knowing a trans person, not really having a lot of personal interaction, they don't have another point of view to go from. So they're like, well, that's what people think being trans is. Okay. And
Yeah.
so when you say actual trans, like, what do you mean? And how can we think about it differently so we can um, make those distinctions in our minds?
Yeah. So, uh, I mean, an actual trans person would be somebody who has, a mental disorder, which is gender dysphoria. And to be trans, I mean, there's people on the left that will say that you don't need gender dysphoria to be trans. All you need to do is self-identify, and that's how you get the difference between transition people that are
Right.
transitioning and then fully presenting males saying that they're trans, right? Or females saying that they're trans, and not really doing anything to combat that. Whereas trans is the act of taking hormones and living and appearing as the opposite sex, which doesn't make you the opposite sex. Obviously, we need to, and that's the other area where you see leftist is this trope that trans women are women. And I don't believe that either. I think that a woman is an adult human female, where a trans woman is an adult male who transition who has gender dysphoria and takes the steps to transition and live and assimilate into society
Right.
as a woman.
Right.
It doesn't mean we're the same, and it doesn't mean that I have a right to speak on what it is to be a woman. I think those are the things that we see all too often. But I think the actual act of transitioning is what makes somebody trans. Now, in about 2013, we know that um, they changed the definition of what trans meant, where it used to be transsexual, which was the term. Transsexualism used to be the term of transitioning and living as the opposite sex, where they changed it to transgender. And transgender basically means that anything that, if you don't identify or don't feel you are in your anything that's not within the confines of your sex. And basically, so they're looking at stereotypes of within what your sex-based stereotypes would be, then you're trans. And that's kind of how they've been able to push this
So, like,
ideology. So
boys playing
anybody
with
that's
dolls, girls liking
yeah,
sports and not wanting to wear dresses and things like that. Like, I was a tomboy growing up,
yeah,
and, I was very rough and tumble and didn't fit with any of the I didn't like Barbies, and I didn't wanna do the what you might call the girly things that were pretty big in the early '70s. And I think if somebody got their hooks into me today at that same age, they probably would have told me I was trans because
hmm
I didn't and it wasn't what's so scary to me is I wouldn't have described it. And I had the chance to think about it because people would say like, "Well, oh, you're like the guys or you're one of the guys or whatever." Um I would never have described it as being uncomfortable in my body. I would
yeah,
never have described it that way. I would only have described it as being uncomfortable with those stereotypes, like with living my life doing that stuff. I liked my
hmm
body just fine. Like, I was not really remotely interested in doing anything to change who I was physically or biologically. I just wanted to do the boy things. I wanted to play hardball, not softball. I wanted to play soccer, and there wasn't a girls' team. So I played on the boys' team. Like, things I wanted to do in life that were relegated to the boys or that seemed to be boy things, playing with G.I. Joe, like appealed to me more. And I could probably psychoanalyze myself and say, well, I was really close to my dad. My mom had left. I mean, there's all kinds of psychological reasons why I probably wanted to be more like the boys than like the girls, but it had nothing to do with my body. So I don't think gender nonconforming people necessarily have gender dysphoria at all.
exactly. Yeah, well, that's I think that's the biggest issue that we're seeing. And well, one of the reasons why it's so dangerous is because then you have a lot of y- autistic girls,
Yeah.
young females who are on the spectrum who um, are told this, and then they attach themselves to it simply because somebody put this idea into their head. And from what I have kind of become to understand is the way that like Asperger's presents in females is very
Mhm.
much the same as gender dysphoria feels like for anyone else that has it.
Well, and they tend to be, or I've learned from a Gen Spect webinar, kids on the spectrum, girls in particular, girls tend to mask, whereas boys tend to be more obviously. autistic in the Asperger's realm. We're not talking about nonverbal autism.
Yeah.
We're talking about the ones where you go, something's different. And the girls present a little differently. They try to mask or act like the other kids. And it's not coming from like in here. They're just sort of putting on an act. And they tend to be emotionally a couple of years behind in their maturation. So you can imagine how uncomfortable it is when they start reaching, physical maturity, like puberty, that the body begins to change all over the place without your control. Like here you're not really differentiated that much from the boys. It's kind of like you can get kind of like the masking's easier. So what I have to do to fit in socially doesn't require the same degree of work, emotional work, physical work, etc., as it might do when I've hit puberty. And now it's like, I don't even know, like, how do I act? What do I do? The process of putting on that costume is more challenging. And I can imagine how it would make kids feel more like they'd gravitate towards immediate acceptance, celebration, protection. Like, you can't pick on this person, whereas before they were awkward. So there are all kinds of reasons why I think that happens. I do want to address some of the comments and the questions, if that's okay with you, as they've been coming up. So, of course, you get this a lot, right? You get people saying, regardless of what you say, you're a man. What do you say to that?
I mean, technically that's accurate. At the end of the day, because I mean, a man is an adult human male. I just don't think it shows the whole picture of who I am and how I live my life. I think that to say trans woman is a little bit more accurate, because that is, I mean, if anybody else, in general, everyday society, most people aren't going to know that I'm trans. I know a lot of people that know I'm trans will say that I don't pass it all online, but they know I'm trans. In society, I feel people are always surprised if I tell them that I'm trans. It's interesting.
Okay. And so then this person is saying that they don't, I don't recall using pronouns. I think I've called you by your name since we've started, but whatever. I don't think, if I were to use a pronoun, to be perfectly honest with the audience, it would be for my convenience. In other words, it would just roll out of my mouth because of my visual perception, and it would be easier for me to speak than to be like constantly trying to be literal. That would be actually harder for me. It has nothing to do with you making a demand of me. So just so we're clear, you've never made that demand. And
I'll address that. I'll address that last one too, because it's interesting.
I did. Okay, if I did, David said I did say she. Like I said, that's how automatic it was. I didn't. It wasn't out of some feeling of obligation. Just so you'll know. No.
Yeah, and see, this is where I think that's the whole idea too. Is whatever comes out of your mouth is what you're visually and audibly understanding. It's just natural. It actually takes work sometimes to misgender somebody, and I think that's where people make the mistake. Now, when it comes to compelled speech, I don't compel anybody to use she, her pronouns for me. Now, I have people that are very Christian that are friends of mine, and they come up and they say, Sarah, I can't, in good conscience call you she, but I don't want to be disrespectful because I do think you're a great person, everything like that. So what should I do? And I just say, use my name. I mean, it's my legal name. It's who I am. I mean, I say, I have no issues if you use my name. And really, then what you say when I'm not around is really none of my business. Like, I'm not going to compel anybody's speech, even when I'm not, when I'm not around. But
yeah, it's like, I'm not in the room. Call me whatever you want, So,
and I also explained this in my speech the other day. Somebody asked me about this, and I kind of told them that we all have our place in how we fight this stuff too. Like, I don't misgender. I try to use the right pronouns even for people that I don't really respect, because what I do is it shows respect. And so if we want to get more of these people on our side, I think we have to show respect. To where the same point is, I know why some people purposely misgender people who don't even agree with free speech as well. I think if you don't agree with free speech, then you really have no right to demand stuff from anybody else. And I understand why people use that just to get under your skin. But my strategy to bring people over is to show show respect that they wouldn't show me, honestly.
Okay. So there's a lot of really interesting questions. So this one is, define transphobic that doesn't end up as understanding biological reality. So in other words, do you think that it's legit? And for because I've actually said to people out loud, I'm transphobic, meaning I'm afraid by and large, of this movement, of the whole subject of what it's doing to children, of what it's doing to our society, of what it's doing to women and women's spaces. And so I'd be lying if I said I'm not deeply concerned, afraid at times. Now, but at the same time, when I meet someone like you who says, I agree that biological sex is a reality. I don't disavow that biological sex is real, that, I am not technically a woman, these kind of things. And I'm kind of like, well, what do we call that? What would we call me? Am I a transphobic? Or it's like, what's the difference?
No, I understand what you're saying. I don't think that you would be considered transphobic. I mean, I think transphobic in the way that it's defined as, phobic is really weird because it's always been kind of used in the same slight as like racism and
Yeah.
sexism.
Homophobia.
It's like a transism type thing. I guess, it's not really a fear of trans people. Yeah, homophobia is the same way. It's not really a fear of gay people. It's a hate of gay people, or not believing that they exist, or believing that it's a choice, type thing. That the whole nobody's born gay is kind of a homophobic trope. Same with, I guess trans people would be the same type of thing, to say that, to lump us all into one category and say there are no good trans people, and they just need to, grow out of it and live their lives as I see fit, like for them, like type thing. And
Right.
it's the same type of people who think that, yeah, it's casting one shadow over an entire population of people. I think that's any type of ism or anything like that. That's what it
Yeah.
comes down to.
Okay. And then David's asking, do you feel that people in this movement are intentionally misleading children, or do you feel that they are just confused? Meaning like the adults. So the adults talking to
Yeah.
children in the classroom and so forth, are they intentionally misleading the children to like recruit them, quite literally?
Yeah.
Or do you think they are well-intentioned and think they're just confused about reality, or I don't know, something else? Maybe
I
David
think
can clear.
it's both. I think it's really both, because again, I mean, there is this whole higher narrative, this higher idea that this works for, that is kind of manipulating a lot of this population into going along with this. And because, queer theory is a Marxist theory, it's a way for leftists to be able to gain control of your children and give your children power. I mean, when we see that like CPS is now being threatened to be called for not affirming genders and stuff like that, that is a fear tactic, and it is a forceful way of getting people to believe in that the government now is in charge of your kids and you are not. I think for the most part, especially, and I think most of these teachers, some of these teachers are just creepy and are probably groomers, like some of these TikTok
Like
teachers that we see
literal,
and stuff.
like
Yeah,
sexual. Yeah, I would agree.
yeah,
It seems
I think
pretty
there's some
obvious.
of that. I think the vast majority of them, they're believing the lies that it's better to affirm, and that because these children's emotional well-beings are at stake and everything like
So they're
that.
just
And you got to
dupes.
remember, as they're pushing SEL in school, right? So social emotional learning, as they're pushing SEL in schools, and they're worrying more and more about children's emotional statuses instead of their intelligence and what they're learning in school, because like in SEL they think that the EQ score is the emotional quotient
Right.
score is more important than the IQ.
Right.
And
No,
so when
totally.
you're
Yeah.
looking more at the emotional,
Mhm.
you're worried, they're being told that, hey, these kids need to be affirmed because that goes into their emotional status, and that is more important than what they're learning in school. And so you need to be more aware of their emotional well-being. And so they're being manipulated via that system to be more in control of that. And it's the same thing. I mean, you got to remember, the left also plays on emotions. Like they know that people are emotional
Right.
creatures, and they can manipulate that emotion. So I think there are a lot of these people that are just being manipulated, and they truly do want the best for these kids. They're just believing the lies.
Okay. And then Ellis says, how does he fight gender ideology as a trans person? He's perpetuating it. He wouldn't be fetishizing us and wearing woman face otherwise. So how do you respond to that one?
That's a difficult one to answer because I'm trying to live my life as I see fit. I'm an adult. I should be able to do what I want. Any adult should be able has control over their own body and should be able to do what they want. I am doing what makes me comfortable. I am dealing with my illness the way that has made me feel more comfortable. I mean, the day that I came out, I felt an extreme weight lifted off my shoulder. And so this has been a benefit for me. Whereas ideology is harming the most vulnerable people in the society, which is children. I think, I don't believe in postmodernism, and that is what queer theory is built on as well. So it's postmodern neo-Marxism. I think that we can look at that.
I'm sorry. How would you define gender then? So like one of the things, as I understand it, with the trans ideology is a concept of gender that most people who are not into the trans ideology don't believe in. Like I, for example, don't believe in the concept of gender as a feeling or as something that, like if you ask me, what does it feel like to be a woman? I'd be like, I honestly don't know. I only know what it feels like to be me. And I know what it feels like to have period cramps. I know what it feels like to give birth to children, but not all women never give birth. And some people have menopause early, so I would never even deign to say what it feels like to be female. I know that there are things that because I'm female and built differently and put together differently, that I may have experienced that a man wouldn't. So for example, certain kinds of insecurity or feelings physically at risk and so forth that I don't think a man would necessarily feel. But then what is gender? They're saying there's such a thing. It's like a separate soul. It's like a whole separate magical thing. So what would you say?
No. Well, I actually think you're right, because I've actually asked the same question. I'm like, does every woman know what it feels like to be a woman? No, I think we all have our own individual feelings. And so for me to say what it is to be a woman, I don't know. Now, I actually wrote an article in Human Events a couple weeks ago. It was about the whole Dylan Mulvaney situation. I kind of talked about this, where I said, masculinity and femininity is more based on stereotypes, and that is kind of more what plays into what they consider gender, whereas maleness and womanness or femaleness is based on sex. And I think that gender is a combination of gender is basically based off of your sex. So like I said earlier, a woman is an adult human female. So it's still binary. The difference is I think with trans people, you can look at it and say, like I said, technically I am still a man. I mean, that is what it is. I'm still male, and so that makes me a man. But it goes back to the point that, maybe for realistic societal purposes, to call me a trans woman is a little bit more relevant. And so I don't think that there's like these 1,000 genders. I don't think gender is a spectrum. I think that it's based off of sex, but then we can look at a separate system to where trans people are different from their assigned sex at birth. It's an anomaly category. It's not necessarily based on the gender spectrum or the gender as a spectrum.
So I think what people are maybe saying is like, well, what then is gender dysphoria? So like if there isn't this mysterious soul-like thing where you say like, I feel dysphoric I feel disassociated from whatever that thing is, right? And one of the commenters made the point that when we see somebody with body dysmorphia. In other words, I look at myself in the mirror and I see myself heavier than I actually am, or it makes me feel really bad. So I'm anorexic, and we don't obviously offer that person liposuction, and we don't affirm and go, yeah, you're right, you're a fat pig. Like, we don't do that. So we treat that as that's you're not seeing yourself correctly and you need help, and so on and so forth. So how does the feeling manifest that you were diagnosed with as the mental illness, that for that feeling, in other words, the only thing that you could do, or you felt you could do, to resolve that and to live your life comfortably, was to appear as a woman, or appear more feminine than you were, or whatever you want to call it?
So, well, that's a great point. I think this is, we talked about this a little bit offline too, is that's one of the misconceptions about trans people. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about trans people, because we hear so often that trans people are delusional, because a lot of people confuse gender dysphoria with body dysmorphia. Like you said, body dysmorphia is when you look in the mirror and you see something that's not actually there. It's and that gives you anxiety, and so you try to correct that. Gender dysphoria is kind of the exact opposite, to where when you look in the mirror, I still, to this day, I see everything in the mirror that makes me male, and that gives me anxiety. So knowing that something in the mirror is making me not pass or not be seen is the way that I feel more comfortable, is what gives me anxiety and whatnot. Now there is some.
So it's not like that you're fetishizing the female form; it's that you're looking at your male form and not liking it.
Exactly. I never, and that's one of those things. Like, even with me, like, I not to be too open, but I never even liked to be naked. I would always wear like a pair of shorts and stuff like that. I hated being naked, just because, and I didn't realize it until I really started to look introspectively at this issue and be like, wait, that's because I'm not comfortable, like, with my body in that way. Like,
Right.
I did not feel comfortable with what I had. And so that is gender dysphoria. Now, there is some overlap between gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia, because there are some trans people that will look in the mirror, some trans people that completely pass everyday society, you would never know. But then again, they see that, maybe they think, again, they're fat, and if they lost some weight, then maybe they would look more feminine and stuff like that, when it really isn't that. And that's one of the reasons why there's a high propensity of like eating disorders in the trans community as well. But it's kind of the exact opposite. And like, so that's why I take issue when people call it a delusion, because I'm anything but delusional. I know exactly what's there. I probably know it too well what's there.
Do you like, are you trying to use like female spaces, for example, the restroom, the locker room, or do you think that people in your situation should be permitted to do that? Or do you understand why women are upset about that, and not just for their children, but for themselves?
No, I do understand that. I use female spaces. I do. I mean, when I got a membership to the gym, I called the gym to see what their policies were, to make sure, to see what they if they had issues. And here's the thing, is this is where I come at it from a libertarian standpoint, and I think a lot of people want a black and white issue, and I think that businesses should be able to make the decisions for what happened with inside their establishments. If somebody didn't want me going into the female restroom, they have every right to make that decision. It's and I think the free market can decide on those things. That's my solution. I think it's a better solution than going black or white with using government force either way. Where and I always say this, I mean, you have to be aware of yourself. I think if you are a fully male presenting person, you don't belong in a female restroom or locker room. If you are attempting to pass and you are respectful when you go in there, then there's some discussion that can be had there.
I think it's hard because we don't know. You know, it's like it's almost like biologically, it's not almost, it is biologically programmed into people to be able to recognize the opposite sex for safety purposes. That's evolutionary. And so when, you know, what I'm concerned about is that women and children, and especially female children, are already facing being socialized to be agreeable, right? Are being pressured to be respectful or deferential or to assume benign intent on the part of every person going into the restroom as it is, and then every person who would be passing, right? And generally speaking, women are pretty good at even identifying trans women, in other words, passing, that was a man at one point, or that is a man, and you know, like, in other words. And I think it's just like, is this person Sarah? Or is this person the creepy person who's pretending to be like Sarah, or is like Sarah because they do fetishize the female form? You know, so it's that pressure I think people feel like they're under to make these they make these judgments, and it's just a lot safer to say I can't trust anybody because I can't decide on a case by case basis and make sure that I'm safe or my child is safe or whatever. And it puts people, good people, nice people, people who want to be, you know, accepting, in a tough spot. And what we're hearing, of course, is you have to assume the best of everyone. You're bad. You're a bad person because you're doing what comes naturally, that is like literally programmed into your cells that, you know, from evolution, that you need to be protective. And I think that's where we get into disputes. I don't want to go too far down this path, but I just, obviously, I'm trying to walk that line where, you know, I see the comments coming in and I don't like it. I don't want people to be mean and nasty. At the same time, I hear, you know, I hear what they're saying, and I get it, you know, so I feel sort of caught in the middle sometimes. And, you
Well,
know,
I
push
feel
comes to
that
shove, I'm going to
I
be
feel
on
a
the
lot of
side
that.
of the kids. So
I feel a lot of that same way too, because I'm conflicted too. Like, what do I do? Because I understand, and I've on one of Ariel Scarcella's videos, I explained this one time because I explained a situation where I went to a Korean spa with some friends for their birthday. It was kind of like the Wii Spa in California, except for I think once you got past the locker rooms, it was kind of everybody was out in the open and it was fine. But the locker rooms were based off genitalia. And so they put me in the men's room. And I walked into the men's room, took my shirt off. Well, as soon as I walked into the men's room, a man was like, you're in the wrong locker room. Told me that as soon as I walked in. I'm like, no. And as soon as I took my shirt off, I had a panic attack. And so I can completely understand how a woman might feel if a if a trans person's in their space sometimes. And so for me, I have a hard decision to make. Now, again, at the gym, everybody knows me there. And most of the women have just pulled me into their spaces the same way. But I also said, I don't disagree with third spaces either. I think that if a business wants to, create a third space for trans people, that's not transphobic. I think that's absolutely fine. It's what they feel they need to do to protect women and children. So I think, again, if we leave it up to the individual businesses and people to decide, then I think we'll see where society is really at, because people will vote with their dollars in that way. And
how would you react
the actual solutions will come. Like I said, the third spaces will come. If that's the other option that they want to do. I don't think we need to force that type of stuff on people.
Right. And I mean, if somebody individually, I mean, I can see this, if somebody, let's say somebody's a survivor of a rape, physical assault. I mean, whether it was a trans person or not, can you envision that somebody literally asking you not to go in there? Like if you were at the gym and somebody said, please don't come in when I'm in there because I'm just very uncomfortable. Even if they weren't a rape survivor, if they were just like, I'm uncomfortable with this, could you wait for me to be out? Like, what would your reaction be to that?
I would, yeah. I mean, if they ask me, I would probably be, yeah. I mean, no problem. The other thing too is like our gym, I always been kind of conflicted there too, because they have the family locker room, and I think the family locker room has individual stalls, which I don't. So I don't know. Like, it's like, do you want me to go into the family locker room? or do you want me to use the women's locker room? Or
Right. Right.
I don't. It's one of those tough decisions. But like I said, I've never
Mhm.
had any issues. But I'm always going to be respectful of those conversations. I also say this with because this comes up with shelters as well.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think, because I mean, yes, trans women are victims of rape at a higher level as well, and so I look at the organizations. I don't think funding should be based off of what their decisions are, but if they don't want to accept trans people, I think that needs to be respected as well, because that is a space where those women have a right to privacy and everything like that. Now, again, I think that there can be different solutions to where you can separate the trans women from women and put them in separate areas of a shelter as well. I think that could be another option there.
Mhm.
So I think that I don't think we're looking at the actual causes. Sometimes we just want these black and white solutions
Mhm.
when we talk about the issue. Um,
I think people are scared too of I'm trying to figure out how to put this. I mean, I'm noticing in the comments people are asking about like what about what we perceive as, and I think there's something to be said for this, a sharp rise in the number of people who are what you've described as transsexual, people who say I don't want to present to the outside world, so much so that I will start changing my body like surgically,
Well, that's an issue.
chemically.
Yeah, that's what we call self ID. I mean, self ID. That's not trans, because again, being trans is the act of transitioning. Otherwise, it used to be just crossdresser, transvestite, and transsexual. That used to be how it used to be before we turned it into transgender.
But what do you but I think what people are concerned about is, and I mean, I've seen different people explain this different ways. Like I've seen some people say it's something in the water. It's fluoride. Like, I mean, like I've seen other people say, I'm talking not the ideology. I'm talking literally the
Yeah.
rise in people, as you point out, who are just content to like, I'm going to go have my surgeries. I'm an adult. I'm going to have my surgeries. I'm going to go live my life.
Mhm.
I'm not looking to get anything. Just leave me alone. But yet I think most people would say, possibly even those people, possibly even you, that's a I would imagine you'd prefer that you weren't like that, that you'd prefer that you were comfortable as you were born and that you didn't have those feelings. So I guess
Yeah.
the question would be, if people are saying what is this illness, and should we not be looking for an actual solution to the illness that helps people live as they were, as nature kind of set them up when they were born, rather than saying here are these different surgeries and these different hormones and these different treatments which are creating, even for the people who aren't trying to trespass anyone, they are creating a cultural problem. I mean, we're having these conversations, we're
Yeah.
having these debates, we're worrying about should I have a third bathroom in my establishment or whatever, because this seems to be on the rise separate from the ideology. The ideology is making it like exponentially worse, obviously for political reasons. But I still think statistically, even if you go back in history, we were talking about like a tiny number of people that would have this illness. And now I feel
Yeah.
like that number has grown. Are there people working on researching like why you felt the way you felt?
I mean, there have been studies on some of this stuff. I mean, and this is even Deborah So talks about it in End of Gender a little bit. It's the same studies that kind of showed what happens in the womb that can cause some of these issues. Again, a lot of these studies are so small, and people are. It seems like now any study that they go to put out that's going to study like that could prove detrimental to trans, or not detrimental to trans people, but detrimental to, I guess, the ideology. It really is detrimental to the ideology. They're kind of being shut down. Like there's almost no, you can't do a study that's going to question the narrative that they're trying to push as well. And so I think
Well, they're trying
that
to
is
make
part
it
of the
like
issue.
that it's all fluid and you can just,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what you were born. You could just choose to be whatever the heck you want. And there's surgeries and, like that to me seems absolutely ludicrous, but that's what we're
Yeah.
seeing.
Well,
And
it's the same path as we saw with the gay community as well, when it was trying to find the gay gene, or trying to find, or just, I mean, conversion therapy in and of itself, like trying to, that we could make these people just right, and it's just not, it's not possible. There's something innate about this disease the only treatment that they've come up with is to transition.
Right.
Where, I mean, if there was something that would help, I
Mhm.
mean, I would have tried it. I mean, I was older when when I came out, because I suffered my whole life with anxiety, that, wishing that people would not find out that I had
Mhm.
I had these feelings inside. So yeah, you're right. I wouldn't have lived my life like this, and I think that's one of the things that I speak about with, I would love to tell children, like, this is not a glamorous lifestyle. It's not something that you should be strive to be. No, it's something that we live with. It's not something that we want to be. Um,
What
and
about
so we do our best to live with it.
yeah, and I'm sorry to keep peppering you with these like
Yeah.
really challenging questions. And I so appreciate your willingness and openness to answer. But I feel like, we have to talk about these things and go ahead and ask the hard questions, because otherwise people are just going to go off to the side and come up with their own conclusions. And I would rather ask somebody. So, what about the claim that the profusion of, the proliferation of porn and the likelihood that children at a younger age, and even in our whole society, just the whole uh just it's everywhere. Do you think that consumption of porn can turn people, can take people and get them into this mindset of uh not liking their male form, or wanting to appropriate the female form? Do you think there's some validity to that? Did it affect
I
you?
mean,
I mean, was that a factor
I
in you at all? Or I'm not to be I'm somebody asked, and I'm just like throwing that out there. Like, do you think that's it? Right? You don't have to answer. I'm just
no,
asking.
so no, I know. I think it could. I think that there is something about porn being so easily accessible that's not just coming out in the trans community, but it's coming out in general society as a whole, right? You're seeing a lot of different things happen because of it. Um, I don't know if porn necessarily did anything. It was the cause of this. I'll say, actually, the only thing that I ever saw when I watched porn was, I would imagine that I was the woman in porn films. It wasn't even in any other, any way, shape, or form. That's where my head went. And so again, that almost told me to myself that I was like, I'm imagining myself with a man, but I am the woman in this film. And I think most people would not feel that way when they watch it. And I think that it can cause a lot of harm in the society. Now, I have a lot of friends that do porn or did porn. I mean, Brandy Love follows me on Twitter. So
Mhm.
Buck Angel is a former porn star, and he's with our group. I think, and I know Eva Lovia and a lot of these people are moving to OnlyFans because it's behind paywalls, and they're seeing the harm that it's being done, being so open and free out there, that if you can put it behind paywalls, then there's validity, and you can own your own content, because there's a lot of manipulation in the porn industry as well, like pressure and all that stuff. And so they're saying, if we can put it behind paywalls, then that's a lot better, and adults can actually go and 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 view at their pleasure. But at least we can stop children from viewing it like we're seeing now.
Right.
But I don't know if it has as much to do with it. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
lot of talk where the Tumblr days, I was not on
Mhm.
Tumblr, I was in the army at the time. So um but the Tumblr days, I guess there was a lot of this, and somebody talked about the sissy porn and stuff like that, these different things. And I guess that could have created fetishes for some people. It was never anything that was in my scope. Like I said, I was married and in the army from 2010 to 2017. So
Yeah.
I really didn't have that type of stuff. I had actually a pretty good marriage too. So
Yeah. And you were married to a woman?
yes. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
bisexual. So, I mean,
Oh,
that's the other thing, is I am bisexual. I was married to a woman. Me and my ex-wife are still friends, and she's been very supportive. In fact, when I came out to her because, again, I actually thought this was a fetish for me. I thought it was just I was a cross-dresser, and that was all it was. And then, when we separated, I started to explore a little bit more and realize that this really was about me living more as I saw fit, and it stopped being about sexual aspects of it and more just about everyday life and just living as as a woman, and not the sexual aspect that I thought it might be, because I had never even really gotten a chance to figure out who I was. And so again, through the help of therapist and everything else, this is the conclusion I came to 5 years later after I came out, because I came out to my ex-wife in 2014.
I
So
see. Oh, so you still had 5 years of therapy beyond that, and it before you made this decision?
yeah, so I mean,
Okay.
yeah, so yeah, I came out in 2014, and I came out to my family in August of 2018,
Mhm.
and I started hormones in March of 2019.
I see. Okay. Now, do you find that, and I just want to say I really appreciate you being willing to address these questions. I'm sure it's not easy to be put on the spot and all that, but it's important, I think, for people to understand where you're coming from, and to achieve your goals of helping to fight the ideology. I think it's important for people to understand distinctions. Now, they're still going to form their own opinions. I'm under no illusion that people who are still believing that you're part of the problem, or and what would you say to that? So there are people who are going to still say, I don't care that you're an adult making adult decisions and you want to live your life how you want to live your life and so forth. The fact that you are doing this and doing it visibly is perpetuating the problem and making it still seem like something kids might want to do or aspire to. Like, you're just generically, you're part of the problem. What do you say
Yeah,
to?
I say, you know, I think it's easy to show that, when you're speaking out against it, if you can't be part of a problem if you're speaking against it. And I think that's one thing that I think I wish we had more people that were visibly out here speaking against this, because we are giving the other side of the story. We've been through it.
I see.
We've been through it. We've experienced it. It's like I said, it's not all glitz and glamour, like the leftists will make it seem, and all these people would make it seem. And so if you're saying that I'm part of the problem, I mean, I don't know. Again, my idea is to be a shield for you. So if you're
Yeah.
going out there and you are trying to fight this ideology
Right.
without trans people, you're going to get clobbered, because they're going to tell you that you're transphobic, you just hate trans people, you don't respect even adults that transition, and you just want to take away anybody's ability to transition even as adults. That's what they're going to say. And so
Right.
when there's people out here like me who are saying that's not what you guys believe, because I believe you guys all are doing the right thing, and you guys are exposing the right issues. I mean, it gives a unique perspective to show, like, this isn't what it's all cracked up to be. And
Well,
especially
and
when it's us out here talking about puberty blockers, right? Like when we're talking
yeah.
about puberty blockers and stuff like that, and we're the ones that are saying, like, look, this stuff is detrimental to your health. I think that speaks volumes than to have somebody who's never been through it to speak on that issue. I think we provide a unique perspective that a lot of other people, most people can't.
Well, and I think it's the kid. What we have to recognize is that the ideology is not only pervasive, it's exclusive. You look around the schools, at least here in the United States, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Canada and some parts even of Europe. I think the UK is pushing it back now, but the narrative is crystal clear. It's the postmodernist. Gender is a social construct. You can be whatever you want. It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
It's all these things. It's actually a form of aggression and harm if you quote misgender someone. I mean, these things. Um, and that's why I would agree with people who say, like, you can't really misgender someone, because gender and
Yeah.
sex are basically the same thing. What you can do, I suppose, is decide for yourself if you're going to go along with the way the person is choosing to live their life or not. That's freedom of speech too. So, but
Yep.
it's not, you're not you're accurately gendering them, or
Yeah.
sexing them, whatever you want to call it. It's just going to come down to those social mores of like what you personally and that person find acceptable, but it shouldn't be legislated. I'm 100% against compelled speech. But
Yep.
I think with the ideology, they're so exclusive that, and I want the audience to understand this, when you try to help, when you try to fight, you get it almost like twice as hard even as I get it. You're a traitor, all this kind of stuff. And that's not to say that you might be as physically at risk as I would be. I mean, they'll beat the living, they might beat you up too, but they're going to kill me.
Yeah.
One punch and I'm dead. And so, there's that. But at the same time, it gets nowhere politically if you have, group of people A who have nothing whatsoever in common with the people who claim to represent group of people B, right? Then you're literally, until people cross over. So it was the same with the civil rights movement. Until there were white people prominently walking, marching arm in arm with Black civil rights marchers, it was an us against them kind of scenario, which is terrible. I don't agree with that, but that just kind of is the way it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, as I understand what you're trying to do, is you're trying to come over, like you said, provide some cover.
Well, and to the other question is, how do you expect to pull people out of this ideology if you don't accept them for where they are right now? Is how do you get it through to them that this ideology as a whole is harmful if you're not even willing to see that, okay, this person's trans, but I can accept that they're trans, but they're looking at getting out of, they're coming beyond the postmodern neo-Marxism and realizing how dangerous that aspect of it is. How do you pull them out of it? You're not making it enticing for them to come over to your side, and as well, like the detrans community, it's kind of the same thing. Is like, if I see people in the detrans community getting attacked from both sides as well, because they may still be gender nonconforming or stuff like that. And it's like, how are you going to attack somebody who's detrans and expect that more people are going to be willing to come, like, detransition and come to your side, right? And then even like what we were talking about earlier with like bathrooms and stuff like that, that hurts some of this conversation hurts the detrans community as well, because now that they kind of start to present like a detrans female starts to present more male, because now they have facial hair, they have all this other stuff. It's like, are you going to now say you can't use my bathroom or locker room either because you have facial hair, or you are now your voice sounds more masculine because you took testosterone for multiple years? I think that's where a lot of this can kind of backfire as well. And a solution to that as well, and I mean, here in Georgia, we can't change our IDs unless we have the surgeries. And so that's another solution that could be proposed as well. Is like, if you can have an ID change, then you can use those surgeries. The problem with that is in some states you can just get your ID changed just because you say so.
Just because you say so. And that's an obvious risk. But you see, for me as a parent, I look at it as kind of a multi-step process. First order of business is protect the children. So as far as I'm concerned, like, my number one job is, put a stop any way we can, using any means necessary, to stop the teaching of gender theory to children. Because I'd like to stop the teaching of it to anyone, to be perfectly honest, and I'm a free speech absolutist, but I think it's certainly in public institutions, because I genuinely believe it's a religion. I don't think that it is scientific at all. I think it's akin to a faith. It has holies, it has, rituals, it has all kinds of things that are in sync with like a cult. And so I think that certainly no public school and no publicly funded university should be teaching it, even as a theory, because, we don't go in and say, Catholic worldview theory on public dollars. Like, we don't do that. So I think it's we don't teach Scientology. We don't teach it. And to me, it's the same. So I want to literally drop a wall and say, you just don't teach this. to children, period.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a conversation at all about this in the confines of the school. Now, I personally would like to educate parents so even privately they're not buying their kids books about, this stuff. But I can't control what parents do outside, in their private lives. If they're going to do stuff like that, I just hope they'll wake up one day and realize that this is not right. But in terms of the schools and public institutions where kids are a captive audience, I would support even taking the license away from doctors who allow these kinds of things. I don't think this should be done. They cannot consent. If a child can't consent to a tattoo, they shouldn't be able to consent to puberty blockers. So,
well, be careful with that, though. Be careful when you say tattoos, though, too. And this is one thing I always talk about, too, because in most states, even the state of Florida, you can get a tattoo at the age of 15 with parental consent.
Well, I'm saying it's certainly we should be consistent that at least bring it to 15. In other words, if you're going to have the American Academy of Pediatrics has a statement saying that they don't recommend that children get tattoos below the age of 18 because they are making a permanent decision. And then without a hint of irony, go on and say that they support affirmation and, puberty blockers and everything else. I'm like, who's paying you? So it becomes obviously about money. So in that respect, I'm
you're right.
Selfish. I look at somebody like you and I'm like, thank you for coming over here and helping us, because if conversations with you, if seeing you, if you being able to be out at a rally or walk around with Billboard Chris or something and say like, don't do this to your children. This is not something you should wish for them, derive, satisfaction or happiness from, whatever their problem is. It's something else. It's not what I had. But see, that's where I think people have some credibility saying, well, aren't you part of the problem? And that's why my first question, what's an actual trans person? Because I can totally see a parent or a teacher or somebody saying, well, how do you know this child isn't just miniature Sarah? How do you know that they just aren't figuring it out sooner than Sarah did? Sarah to go, the entire existence up until whatever age to figure it out and decided to do this or had this gender dysphoria, in therapy.
Yeah.
How do you know that we aren't just discovering it in this 6, 8, 10-year-old? And I don't have an answer. I always fall back on informed consent, and the child can't. And that's where I go.
Well, I think a good answer to that though is, but how do you know when we know that 80% of gender nonconforming children grow out of it by the age of 16? You're hoping that your child is part of the 20% when they could be part of that 80% that will end up detransitioning if you start them on hormones right now.
Right. And so, and then, I get this all the time, they're disappointed in me for getting help from you. They're disappointed and they're accusing me of drinking Kool-Aid when I've done absolutely nothing in my life but say there's no such thing as a trans kid. I mean, I've said it loud and proud. I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah.
I've said I don't believe in trans ideology. I don't believe in gender theory. I don't believe in any of it. I think it is a made up cult-like religion. I think they're brainwashing our kids. They're harming our kids. It's a form of grooming. I've said all of these things. I've said them over and over and over. And yet it doesn't matter if I say, look, I can say it till I'm blue in the face. There are still children every single day going and getting their puberty blockers or going and wrecking their lives. We're going to have a crisis. I don't even want to think about it. It just keeps me up at night. And so if you or Buck Angel or somebody is saying, I want to help stop this, because what are we going to do? We're not going to put trans people in prison. We're not going to make you wear a star that says deviant. That's not our society. Okay. And I'm a libertarian. So I actually do believe that adults should be able to live their lives as they see fit. It is legal to be wrong. As long as you're not hurting somebody else. It is legal to be mentally ill. It is legal to do all these things. You're not, as long as you are staying on your side of the, personal boundary line and not forcing me to do anything about that, then I don't see why, I don't have a problem with that. That's it. You get this one life. It's not up to me to say how to live it. And if you want to offer help to us to protect our kids from bad faith actors, people who do not respect boundaries, people who are super creepy predators, quite frankly, then I'll take the help. And I'm sorry if y'all think I'm drinking Kool-Aid there. I think the people who drink the Kool-Aid are the ones who think they're going to solve this problem politically. You're dreaming. I'm just going to tell you right
Yeah.
now, you're all delusional. So if you think you're going to vote your way out of this problem, good luck to you. If you think you're going to yell and scream and point fingers and call names out of this problem, you're dreaming. You feed right into the Freirean educator. Paulo Freire loves this conflict. Anybody who's a Freirean loves this friction, feeds off it. We call them names. We make it a us them kind of situation. And the educator in the classroom who's brainwashing your kid is going, you see? Do you see the oppression? Do you see how awful it is? I'm trying to liberate you. And they have credibility. So if you point out how they're the bigoted ones and they're the ones who are saying, "Ooh, cis people, ooh, this person, this lesbian doesn't want to sleep with a man." Okay, you're going to have a lot more credibility making that point that they're the bigots, they're the fascists, they're the Nazis, they're the cultists. If you're willing to work across lines of difference, if you're willing to say, "We don't agree, and I don't think this is awesome. I think this is an illness or whatever, but thank you for helping."
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I come from. And I just think there's all flavors of Kool-Aid. And the one right now that I see is we're going to somehow get a candidate or a politician is going to save us. No, they're not. The law isn't going to save you here. This is a cultural problem. It's cultural rot. Some people say it's spiritual rot and cultural rot. I would tend to agree, even though I'm not a religious person. I think having a hollowness and a deficit in your feeling about your purpose on the planet can fill up with all kinds of gross stuff. But I think it's delusional to think that some hero is going to come and save you. They're not.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because I work with politicians all around the country on this issue to try to help. And you're right. I think it's interesting watching now a lot of stuff starting to almost implode within itself just in the last couple of days on Twitter. People going back to their traditional roots, because we have come together to, protect children. And it's interesting because I speak with conservatives all the time. Like, my audiences are almost always conservatives when I go to these places, and they are all in agreements with what you're saying. It's like, hey, and I say to almost every single one, I said, you guys may not agree with how I live my life. That's fine. I'm an adult, but we can all work together to protect children. And I usually get a big round of applause to that. I've had conservative women actually come up to me in the bathroom and give me a hug because of what I'm doing. It's really interesting, but yeah, it's really saddening to see, because we're seeing a lot of the more left-wing, third-wave feminists attacking, social conservatives because they're men and they're not the women on the forefront. We're starting to see that a little bit. And so it's really interesting watching some of this kind of, and almost sadly, ego is getting in the way of what we should be looking at, which is protecting children.
Right. And I mean, just to reiterate for people who joined late, I heard you say that you would never force yourself into a female space.
No.
I
respect whatever boundaries that any establishment would enforce. And it would be, and if I don't like the rules within that establishment, I don't have to go there. It's kind of it's the ideas behind free speech. It's the ideas behind all of this stuff. It's like, if I don't agree with, if you don't want me in your restaurant or your business or anything like that, I don't really care. I'm not going to go there. I don't want, and in fact, I would rather know that you don't want me in there than force you to take my money. I don't want to give people my money in that same regard, And so I'll just take my money elsewhere. And I think that the free market will provide the solutions if we just let it.
Right. I think that, people are just heard you say, well, I was in the restroom. Yeah, because in that particular establishment, they don't have a problem with that. And the women in that particular establishment don't have a problem with that. Now, I think women need to also understand that we are not the Borg and we don't all agree with each other. So in other words, there are going to be women, adult human females, that don't have a problem with trans people in their restroom. I might not be one of them, or you might not be one of them, or it might be situational. In other words, it might be, I know Sarah and I don't have a problem with Sarah, but this new person, don't know them. I'm going to wait till I get to know them, and I'm not going to go in the restroom with that person yet. If you're at the gym, let's say, and you might evaluate on a case-by-case basis, or you might go to a different gym and you might say, I'm going to go to the gym that literally has a third facility, because I don't want to even judge. I don't even want to do it. I just want biological women here and biological men there. And that absolutely should be your right. And that absolutely should be the right of the establishment to say, we're a facility that does not accommodate for trans people. It is biological females here and biological males there. And, people will join those facilities or not. They'll let the free market decide. I'm with that. But I'm just saying, it works both ways. If the trans lobby, the trans activists, or the trans, ideologues are trying to force their will on, children, which is just plain evil. And that would be true of whatever ideology it was. Nobody should be forcing any ideology on children, including like, well, you should all be Marxists. Okay, that shouldn't be either. But let's not pull it out into the adult world. I mean, I guess I feel like we start to be a little hypocritical if it's don't force your views on people when they're little people, but it's totally okay to force your views on adults. You know what I mean? If it's not okay for the adult trans person to force themselves on biological women in an establishment that doesn't want them there, then it's likewise not okay to say every establishment should do things the way I want. Right? I mean, if it's a private establishment and they decide we're cool with the trans people in the bathroom, we don't mind, then don't go there. Don't go there. I mean, that's your decision. And to say no bathroom, like nobody should be able to do this. Now, I'll give you North Carolina as an example. They tried to pass a bill. Saying that all restrooms, like even in a restaurant, private restaurant, had to allow trans, it had to be like no sex, no gender, no. And the restaurants, of course, were like, and the locker room, the gyms were like, now you're making me change my policy. And so, of course, I was against that. A lot of people were against that. Yep. But the reverse shouldn't happen either. You shouldn't go.
Well, that's what happened. Yeah.
You can't.
Well, that's actually where I point to that exact situation as what kind of started this trans craze.
Because here's a classic example.
Yeah.
I'm unsubscribing right now. How dare you support this man in our private spaces? If I don't own the gym, it's not my gym. It's privately owned by Joe Schmo. Okay, Joe Schmo Incorporated privately owns that space. And Joe Schmo says, I'm okay with trans people in the women's locker room. Your beef is with Joe Schmo. And I would suggest you don't join Joe Schmo's gym. Your beef isn't with me for defending Joe Schmo's right to run his gym the way he wants to run it. That's the fact that I defend his right to run his establishment the way he wants to run it is not me agreeing with how he's running it. Yeah. And this is what people can't understand. They're like, you're defending these people in our private spaces. Like, no, I'm not. I'm defending the business person's right to run their business the way they want and let people vote with their feet and their wallet. If you think that's a crazy way to run the business, then out. When it comes to a school, taxpayer dollars and minor children, I am unequivocal. There should be zero tolerance of somebody who is biologically the opposite sex in the opposite sex bathroom. I've made myself as clear as I can on this channel. If you have a problem with that, then by all means, unsub.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. And when it comes to taxpayer dollars and public facilities, we should force a third space if that's where it comes down to. I think that is one area where we can say, hey, there's going to be people that disagree on this, so let's make accommodations for a third space for everybody. I think that's absolutely true.
This is up to parents. If I join a gym, and most gyms, by the way, don't allow children in the gym. Just so you know, I've joined gyms before while I had children, and most of them, unless you're talking about the why that's family oriented, okay? But most adult gyms are for adults, and children aren't even supposed to be in there at all because most people are walking around naked and so forth. They don't have little separate changing rooms. The Y is a little different, and most Ys, because they're Christian organizations, don't accommodate, at least that I understand, and most of the Christian ones don't accommodate trans. So but it's up to the parents. For example, Target has a policy that anyone can use any bathroom that they want. Okay. I pretty much don't shop at Target anymore, except when I absolutely have to, because they have other things they do, like selling binders. And, I just don't support that. But if I were there and one of my daughters needed to use the restroom, I'm going to say, let's wait till we get home, or I'm going in with you. But it's up to me to make that decision. Target's made their decision, and I've made my decision that I don't feel like shopping there. So this is how I see it working. It's not that I want the law to come in and say, you must force. It's hypocritical. If I don't want them to force accommodation for trans people, then I don't want them to force accommodation for me either.
Yep.
I'm
and that's what I was going to say, is that I used that the North Carolina bathroom bill as is what really kicked off this trans debate. If you remember, in 2015, gay marriage was legalized. I was at Fort Bragg at the time, and in Charlotte, North Carolina, they had the bill exactly like you said. It was a city ordinance that said restaurants have to accommodate self-ID. First self-ID issue. They created a problem where there was never, or they created a solution to where there was never a problem, and created a problem because of it. Because then the state of North Carolina went the complete opposite direction, and now you have the leftist activism. So literally, the left created this. They created a solution to a problem that wasn't there. The overcorrection from the right politicians in North Carolina created this monster. It was twofold. So it's kind of like the reason why we're still fighting this.
Right.
And I say this even about the Colorado cake baker. I say, I agree with him. I agree with the ruling, but on the wrong basis, because I think an atheist should be able to get that same ruling. I don't think it should be based on religion. I think that just private property rights are what we should be looking at in these situations. Like, again, if somebody doesn't want to bake a cake for my wedding, I'm going to go somewhere else. And the right says that all the time, but then they don't see it when it comes to like what we're talking about with bathroom issues.
Well, and I do understand.
We have to look at it equally.
And I do understand that people are also upset that the private Joe Schmo that we've been talking about will very often make the decision to accommodate. And I believe this is what happened to Target, and this is what happens at a lot of businesses. They cave. In other words, they're not making a decision based on their own conscience or their own views or whatever. They're just caving to pressure from that 8%. And so the, 82% who were regular, customers, shopper, whatever, who are like, what? Like, suddenly they feel like chopped liver. They feel like we don't matter. Or if they counter protest and say, hey, Target, I'm going to boycott you, and I'm not going to go there because you just caved to the 8% or whatever. But, hey, for example, Ulta, I'm not shopping at Ulta anymore because of your Dylan Mulvaney nonsense. That perception that companies are just dropping like flies and making these decisions because they're private and they can do that. And the rest of their customers are just getting the shaft. I've felt that. And so I would love to see, but again, I even still feel like, well, then we better do a better job. In other words, the 8% is obviously doing a really good job. There's a lot of money behind them. It's, it's a lot of money, and I would love to do a show on that. But unfortunately, the people who've done the most research on that money won't speak to me, because I'll speak to Sarah. A lot of the people who've done the most research on this are feminists who think Sarah's the enemy, will not speak to me, will not come on my show, won't have anything to do with me. They only want to speak to people who would shun Sarah, lock her out of this conversation, etc. And so I'm having a hard time finding experts on the money to speak to. Now, I can go do all my research myself, but with all due respect, I don't get paid to be here. So that's a lot of research. It'd be a lot easier to bring on a guest and say, can you educate us about this? But they won't speak to me. They won't talk to me. I've invited them. They've invited them, but I get the same treatment. I get the same, like, you had Buck Angel on your show. You had Marge Fernandez on your show. And now you've had Sara Higdon on your show. So I'm not going to speak to you. Okay, well, my audience may be small, but we want to know. We want to hear what's going on. I'm just trying to platform this information. So that's That's a problem. But they're very organized. The left always has been more organized, and they're very well funded. And so the 8% wins. But that's not going to change my principles. In other words, I'm not going to suddenly say I'm for force against private entities and private individuals because the bad guys win more. Like that doesn't seem very principled. And if I can cave that easily for that reason, then who am I to criticize them for caving? Right? They're caving because they don't have a principle that says it's my business and I'm going to run it the way I see fit. Or I hate to break it to you guys, they may just agree. That is possible. There are businesses out there where they're just brainwashed. They just are like, okay, sounds reasonable. And they've bought the lie that our kids are being sold.
And they have to make a decision. Well, and they have to make the decision, right? Whether to go with what's profitable or go with what's what they believe within their values. Are they going to cave? Or are they going to alienate half their base? If they don't cave, they're going to alienate half their. If they cave, that they're going to alienate people, and they're going to cave. If they don't cave, they might alienate other people, and so they have to make that decision with their bottom line.
And I think we need to recognize as a people who are against this that we are tragically either not the majority or not a big enough majority that these businesses care. So what I mean by that is, then you can look at voting numbers. There are people, this stuff remains in the schools, remains in the businesses, remains in the store, because there are enough people out there who think they're being good and decent and wonderful, kind people to support it. And they disagree with us. We may find that 70%. We may find that like impossible to comprehend, that there are parents out there who go, I think it's wonderful. And I think it's great that my daughter or my son has all these trans friends. Like, and I'm sorry for my little voice, but that's how they sound in my head. But, they just, whenever I'm talking about some of the left where they're so agreeable, this Valley Girl voice comes out. But
70% of the population believes that the bathroom issue is settled. They think that this is kind of settled, that we accept that, trans people, again, most people are against like the self-ID stuff, but if you're presenting as the sex that if you're presenting as the opposite sex, if you're actually presenting that way, like me, I guess I'm kind of modest and don't want to use myself, but like if I'm presenting as a female and I go, I think 75 to 80% or something like that, the studies have shown are like, okay, that's cool. But if you're a fully presenting male, then it changes the conversation completely. And so, like you said, people may disagree with you. And I think the vast majority are going to disagree with you. I mean, I work with Republican lawmakers across the country, and this isn't on the top of their mind.
That is what I really want people to hear. That's why I said, if you think there's a political solution to this, I am sorry to say this isn't it. So we who are trying to protect our kids, and that's part of the reason I've been like wanting to work with you, is like, I will take help where help is offered from people who agree that this is bad. But while at the same time sharing the principle that individual liberty is a thing, freedom of speech and association is a thing. I mean, these are things that I believe in, and I think my audience knows that. And so, we're not doing so well, guys. We're not winning this battle for our kids. Yeah. We're not. We're losing hand over fist. And I just
had a failed election, basically.
Yeah, we're losing. And I don't think it's a winning argument to say, well, these people are all, sick and demented and deranged, and they're this and they're that and they're this. Like, you may believe that, and in your heart of hearts or whatever, but keep your eye on the goal here. And the goal is, wouldn't you even rather say, see, even this demented ill person agrees with me? I'm sorry.
They're going to clip that now, Deb. They are going to clip that.
Don't you dare. Oh my God. No, I do not believe that, but I'm just saying, yeah, they probably are going to clip that. They are fucking, I got to remember I'm on camera.
I do the same thing because I'm just so open with how I speak. It's just
know, like, but I, and okay, so this is interesting. Christy says, if we were really losing, Deb, they wouldn't be so mad and violently attack the women speaking on this. We are winning. The goal should be to protect kids and women. The goal is to protect kids and women. But when you talk about winning, understand that the people attacking people right now, that was always a perk. That has nothing to do with them feel like they're losing. The people doing that are in this for an excuse to attack women. That's why they're doing it. That's
and
they're
Alinsky's,
violent, aggressive, antisocial people who are hiding behind trans ideology for the specific purpose of showing up in Olympia, Washington, and other places to attack women. That's literally what they dream of doing, and any excuse they can use. That's what an AGP is. That's what people who truly, fetishize and they want to own the female form, and they're very violent and aggressive. There are subsets within this. And so I don't look at how aggressive they are as evidence that they feel desperate or threatened at all. I feel like they're just using the opportunity to be aggressive and violent because that's what they get off on. When I see books come out of the libraries, when I see teachers going as a group to their administration at a school and saying, I'm not teaching this garbage. I'm not doing it anymore. I feel like it's abusive to children. When I see, superintendents replaced because school boards fire them and take it on the chin, lawsuit, whatever comes, we're still firing you because we're not implementing this. When I see people pull their kids out of the schools because they aren't going to take any chances, then I'll say we're winning. But as long as people are still going to be like, I know it's an abusive environment where they're teaching you this, cult, but I'm sending you there every day while I read porn into a microphone at a school board meeting, I don't think that's winning. I'm sorry. I just don't. That doesn't show me winning. It's awareness building. We're building awareness, but we're not winning.
There's stuff that will white pill you, right? That will give you optimism that we are winning, like the Tennessee bill that's about to come out, or even the New York Times article that came out this weekend, which is a huge deal. When you see health organizations around the world changing their stance on puberty blockers, that shows that we're making a change. That shows that we're winning. We're winning. But yeah, just saying that they're afraid and they're attacking. No, you're right. That's just who they are.
Yeah. And we are having small victories, but I think we have to understand how those came about. And we need to replicate that. So they're not accidental. Okay. So Tennessee, as an example, I genuinely believe that the education value of things like what is a woman, the education value of the constant pressure to, really ask these tough questions and put the gender theorists on the spot to defend what they're doing. And going back to actual scientific evidence about children and their brains and their minds and so forth. These are how it's not sexy. It's not easy, but this is what's effective. And yes, we have to educate these lawmakers. They'll say it's a top priority, but that doesn't mean they know how to do it. And so having people like you helping with this, I think, is really important, because politicians are politicians and they want to get reelected. Even the Republicans are probably going to be like, this is a third rail now. I don't know. I mean, I'm against it, you guys, but I don't want to come out like having that be. So I just think it's helpful.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, the bills that I've worked on across the country are other versions of the Don't Say Gay bill. And so those we're looking to replicate that in different areas of the country as well. And any of the politicians that are willing to work with me and speak with me. I always tell I actually always tell these lawmakers, I say, I'd rather us, and this, you won't like this, but I always say I'd rather have us implement school choice than force these bills. But if we're going to write these bills, then let's do it right.
Well, I think even I would rather have school choice than a bunch of things. My problem, of course, is you'll have a situation like Arizona where you have a Republican governor, you implement like the biggest school choice, initiative in the entire nation ever in the history of since school came to be a thing required. And then you lose an election and now you're it's hanging in the balance, whether you keep it, and B, how much it's regulated. Probably going to be able to keep it because you'd have to also turn the legislature. But as long as there's veto power, as long as there's oh, you want this? You're going to have this regulation. Oh, you want this?
Yeah.
You're going to have to curtail homeschooling. I mean, you can't allow something like as important as your right to educate your own child be hanging in the balance of political whim. And I think this is one of those areas where, to me, winning looks very different than it might look to other people. The Tennessee law, I think, is a huge win because now you're talking about the medical practice of medicine. And that would also be where I would go before I'd go to the schools. To be perfectly honest with you, I think as tragic as it is that they're teaching these kids to believe this stuff, it's what they do next that's causing the permanent damage. If you could just keep the kids off the puberty blockers, off the cross-sex hormones, and out of the surgeon's office until they're 18, 19, I prefer 25, 26, quite frankly. But if you can just keep them whole, you buy yourself the time to, get their head right. And then, but when you have therapists, social workers, surgeons, doctors, etc., hospitals, medical schools, only too willing to do these things to kids, even if you got it.
And you also have to remember, you also have to remember that, half this, and we saw this during COVID, half this country is not willing to, half this country thinks doing your own research is a dirty word. Yes. Like, I hate this because there is enough information out there for these parents and even some of these adults who go to transition that if we do our own research, we will find out that, they are manipulated. Like, the doctors are not giving you the whole story. And so when I don't expect doctors ever to give the whole story. Honestly, we saw this during COVID, right? So they're still out there trying to make money and push their narrative. So I think that, we have to teach these parents, like, hey, we have to, like, this is why we have to raise awareness, because then maybe it will get them to do their own research and not just follow blindly with what the science says.
Well, I have a suggestion for what it's worth. Because I've learned things during this conversation, and I'm very grateful that you came in and took the heat of the comment section and answered some pretty tough, direct questions. But I have a suggestion, and that would be that for the folks that you're working with, other trans people who want to fight this, you're familiar with Courage is a Habit, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they make these infographics and lists and so forth and so on. I think it would be very helpful to have similar sort of cheat sheets or explainers. I would call them explainers. That answer some of the questions we've grappled with today. Like, what exactly is gender dysphoria from the trans person's perspective? The trans person who's opposed to trans ideology. Because remember, we have the trans ideologues, right? And then we have trans people who are against that. So from your perspective, what it is, what it isn't, why you think it's wrong for children to be exposed to this, the message you would like to parents to have, kids to have, et cetera. Like, if there could be like an explainer of these things as a force multiplier for you and your organization, I think it would go a long way. And people will still disagree. And people will still say this is bunk and I don't, know they're all bad. Fine. But I think there's the people we need to reach, no offense to anyone here, you're entitled to your opinions and free speech and all that. But what I'm saying is, if 70% is walking around just trying to be nice, and so they're like, I'm okay with the bathrooms, because they're trying to be nice. Or the teachers are just kind of duped and like, but isn't this saving lives? Aren't I saving? They told me I was saving lives, right? So I'm talking about that as the target audience for what I'm describing. The people who already are against this ideology, you don't need to win them over. And especially if they're already against you personally, I'm not saying don't talk to them. I'm just saying, like, it's probably a waste of time. But if you accept insofar as you think that they might be doing a disservice to the cause with the way they're acting, which I sometimes do. But if you're talking about that 70%, well-meaning, duped, incorrect, weak sheeple, whatever you want to call them, they need that. They need that. And they need to know they're not being kind. They're not being helpful. They're actually, if they're a parent of a neurodiverse child, they are being unintentionally abusive. Let's call it unintentional, especially if, somebody in a white lab coat or somebody at with a PhD said, your autistic child needs this because reasons, or they'll kill themselves. I would say it's unintentional. You want to do the best for your kid, but you're not educated on this stuff, but it doesn't change it. It's abuse because they are vulnerable. They're neurodiverse. They need you to be extra knowledgeable. They need you to look out for them and protect them from exploitation. And so you have a bigger responsibility. So those are the people that I think would benefit from something like that, because they're not all going to watch this show. Probably no one's going to watch it now because they're all going to say, Debs, I'm all the wrong things now.
You're not drinking the Kool-Aid. It's all good.
I'll be a turd and I'm going to be a wokey or something now because of this conversation, and whatever.
I mean, that's what I get. I mean, that's the reality of being somebody like me on the side too. Is I've been called a TERF, transphobic. I was called an anti-trans person for my event that I was doing in Rhode Island. And so but actually I will say you're absolutely right, and we have been talking about pulling resources and stuff like that together, so to build something exactly like what you're talking about, and hopefully get it up onto our website and do all that. That's with the Trans Against Groomers. I mean, we're just getting off the ground here, but there's also organizations like the Gender Dysphoria Alliance and stuff like that, which are great resources. GenSpec and stuff.
GenSpec has some great, parents, if you're watching and you want to learn more about this, but also get, ammunition for your own arguments. And I would recommend it, because no matter how deeply you feel emotionally, even if all of this repulses you, okay, if your goal is to successfully persuade parents who don't feel as you do, who think it's okay or not that big a deal, or what's the problem, you go to GenSpec and you either watch some of their videos or look at some of their materials. You're going to be able to reach them where they are. You're going to have the knowledge that you need to say, well, let me ask you this, and you'll have information. You're just unlikely to get people to change their mind by telling them something insulting, something personally insulting. And I'm not talking about pandering. I'm not talking about changing your view. There's a big difference between pandering and simply just approaching people as if, in good faith, and waiting until they demonstrate they're in bad faith to get ugly or walk away. Right? Because you have to have your efforts be effective, where the children's lives are hanging in the balance. So that's kind of my approach. And when somebody comes at me with, well, you're this or that, and I'm like, not good faith, bye-bye. I'm not going to waste my time. It's pointless. And I'm pretty sure you feel the same way, that, when people come at you with well, you're just a this. It's like, okay, well, I guess we're not meant to work together. Like, I mean, nobody has to work with everyone. You're not on the hook to work with Sarah. Okay. You'd probably prefer they don't, if they're really hardcore against you living your life.
Exactly.
Like, that's fine.
Well, that's I mean, I believe in freedom of association, and that's absolutely what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So I cannot thank you enough. I know this is, not the easiest conversation to have. And I really want people in the audience to understand that until you've, walked a mile in somebody's shoes when they're dealing with something, where people from all sides are really hardcore against you, it takes a lot of courage. Whether you agree with Sarah or not, it takes a lot of courage to come here and sit here and answer these very direct questions. And so I am extremely grateful. And I thank everybody for listening and watching and trying to be, as respectful as possible. I know we all have very strong feelings about this, and I understand that. We're talking about children. And whenever we're talking about children, people get real understandably worked up. So thanks to everyone who came. If you're watching this or listening to this on the replay, thank you very much. Please like, share, and comment and subscribe if you are inclined. If you are going to unsubscribe because of this show, then I don't know. Okay, bye. I'm sorry. And have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you again.